They came in silence, the stars barely flickering as the vessel breached Earth's atmosphere. A ship unlike any other descended, not for war, not for diplomacy, but for a challenge. The strongest warrior than Vok Dominion had arrived, not with weapons drawn, but with boots ready to touch soil. His name was Cthar, and he had come to prove himself against the most unpredictable force in the galaxy: humans. No one spoke when he first stepped off the landing ramp. 10 feet tall, plated in living armor that shimmered with every breath. He stood taller than any man there. His presence radiated strength, the kind that made even seasoned Marines glance twice. But the drill sergeant didn't flinch. "You'll train like the rest," he said, pointing a thick finger at the alien warrior. "No exceptions." This wasn't a contest of brute force. It was an agreement between Earth and the Galactic Assembly, a diplomatic experiment. If Cthar could endure and pass the most grueling military initiation humans had to offer, it would set the precedent for shared operations across species. But the unspoken truth was simpler. Everyone wanted to see if a human-made gauntlet could break something that had never known defeat. Day 1, 0 hour. Recruits stood shoulder to shoulder in formation as the sun blazed over the sand-covered training compound. Cthar towered over the rest, his arms crossed, posture motionless. Beside him, Private Marcus Jackson squinted upward. "Bet he doesn't even sweat," he muttered. "You think he bleeds?" Private Lou whispered. Cthar heard it all. His species processed audio 10 times faster than humans. Yet he remained still, unmoved by their curiosity or doubt. Inside, his mind ran battle simulations, measuring gravitational resistance, estimating caloric requirements, monitoring stress vectors. Everything told him this planet was soft, its inhabitants slower, weaker. This would be a formality. Then the whistle blew. Push-ups, planks, burpees, simple things by his standards. He finished every drill before most humans had completed their first set. The instructors didn't know how to respond. They didn't yell at him. They didn't correct his form. He was perfect, but perfection made him an outsider. Jackson tried to keep pace and failed. Lou collapsed mid-drill. Others grunted, cursed, and pushed harder, but the gap was clear. Cthar wasn't one of them. He was above them, and they hated that. It wasn't malice, at least not yet, but the Marine Corps bred competition, and in this race, the alien had no rival. Recruits started avoiding his line and chow. No one spoke to him in the barracks. When the sergeant demanded team formations, Cthar always ended up last picked, a floating variable in a machine built on cohesion. Yet, Cthar didn't care. He hadn't come for acceptance. His entire life had been a forge of dominance. On Vok, warriors didn't bond. They survived, and those who didn't perished. Still, something was different here. In the second week, during night drills, he noticed something. Jackson tripped, sprained his ankle mid-run. Before the instructor could reach him, 2 other recruits had already hoisted him up, carrying him across the line. No gain in it, no survival incentive. They didn't leave him behind. Cthar logged the event in his memory. Illogical, inefficient, noble. The next day brought combat training. The sergeant paired Cthar with Private Lou for close-quarter sparring. "This ain't a duel," he barked. "This is about control, not dominance." Cthar nodded. Lou did not. He lunged recklessly. Cthar deflected effortlessly, but stopped short of striking. Lou pressed again, harder. This time Cthar caught his fist midair and stared into his eyes. "You seek to defeat me?" he asked, voice resonant and clear. "I want to know what makes you so special." Lou replied through gritted teeth. "I do not seek special. I seek to understand." Lou dropped his arms slowly, confused. Cthar released him. The room went quiet. Even the instructors didn't know how to proceed. Later that evening, while others shared stories or wrote letters, Cthar remained at his bunk, observing. He noticed the laughter, the shared frustration, the competition that never crossed into betrayal. Humans failed, constantly, and yet they grew stronger from it. That was new to him. By the third week, physical drills no longer tested Cthar. The instructors moved into more advanced conditioning, mental trials, sleep deprivation, simulated emergencies, moral dilemma scenarios. This, they believed, was where the alien would stumble. And they were right. In the VR simulation, recruits were dropped into a ruined city under siege. A child cried for help near a burning structure. The program was simple: rescue mission under fire. Kthar analyzed the scenario. The child was not real. The loss of time increased mission risk by 24.7%. The mission took priority, but Jackson didn't hesitate. He ran for the child. So did Lou. So did 3 others. The mission was a failure by logic, but a success by spirit. After the debrief, the instructor stared hard at Kthar. "You left the child," he said. "She was not real," Kthar replied. "Neither is the medal you're chasing, if you don't learn what we're fighting for." Kthar didn't respond. That night, he stood outside, staring at the stars. On Vok, there were no children, only successors, and no weakness. But here, weakness was not discarded. It was lifted. The next day, Kthar joined the others in the mess hall. No one said a word, but Jackson slid his tray next to him. After a moment, Lou sat down too. Small actions. No applause. But something shifted. The sergeant didn't address it. He simply barked the next command. Morning drills resumed. And for the first time, Kthar adjusted his pace. Not for himself, but to move in sync with the squad. No one noticed at first. But by the end of the run, Jackson slapped his arm. "Not bad, big guy." Kthar grunted, then nodded. He didn't understand humans yet. But for the first time, he wasn't just observing them. He was becoming one of them. Kthar's presence had become a quiet constant. No longer the spectacle he was on arrival. He now moved as part of the machine, not outside it. Yet despite his growing familiarity with the rhythm of the camp, the tension hadn't dissolved. The other recruits still watched him, measured themselves against him, and more than a few burned with the need to outshine him. He was the invisible benchmark no one could admit they were chasing. The first real test came during the endurance gauntlet. 5 miles of terrain, obstacles, and live stress simulations. Designed to break even the toughest recruits, it had one unspoken goal: to find the wall each soldier couldn't push through. Kthar didn't struggle. He never had. He sprinted through the fire lanes, tore up the hill, vaulted the barriers. When he reached the finish line, he stood alone for nearly 4 full minutes before the next recruit arrived, panting and barely conscious. No applause waited for him. No awe. Just silence. The others crossed one by one, some collapsing, others vomiting. The instructors barked orders and dragged bodies to shade. Kthar remained standing, eyes scanning, calculating where he had gone wrong. He had finished first. But something about the quiet gnawed at him. That evening, Jackson dropped beside him in the yard without a word. They sat under the floodlights, breathing the same air, drinking the same tasteless electrolyte fluid. Finally, Jackson spoke. "You know you make it harder for the rest of us." "That is not my intent." Intent doesn't change results. Kthar tilted his head, the gesture mechanical but thoughtful. "Should I slow down?" Jackson shrugged. "You should figure out what team you're on." The next day brought the crawl course, under barbed wire, through mud, while explosions echoed above. Every recruit dreaded it. It wasn't just physical, it was humiliating. Every mistake hurt. Every inch forward was earned with pain. And Kthar? He powered through as though gravity were a suggestion. The instructors watched carefully. They weren't impressed anymore. They were waiting. Everyone was. Mid-course, Lou got tangled. Barbed wire snagged his uniform. His shoulder bled. A few recruits paused, unsure whether to go back or risk their own progress. Kthar turned, crawled back, and without a word, lifted the wire an inch off the ground, just enough. Lou slipped free. Kthar didn't linger. He moved forward, pacing the humans now, not racing them. When they all reached the finish line, Lou staggered toward him. "You didn't have to help." "I chose to." The moment passed without fanfare, but the atmosphere shifted again. That night, the barracks buzzed quietly. Someone passed around a pack of cards. Someone else pulled out a music player. When Jackson offered a seat at the table, Kthar sat. He didn't understand the game. He didn't win. That didn't matter. 3 days later, the training shifted into psychological endurance, simulated captures, flashbang exposure, memory recall under stress. Kthar, who had conquered so much physically, finally hit resistance. The memory chamber forced recruits to relive trauma, recorded from their minds, played back in unrelenting detail. Kthar's session lasted longer than any of the others. What the machine found inside him was not fear, but guilt, a mission on Vok, a decision to leave behind his clutchmate during a planetary collapse. The choice had been efficient, the outcome successful, but in the memory loop, the silence of the one he left behind echoed louder than any explosion. Again and again, it played, the moment of retreat, the face he didn't turn back to see. When Kthar finally exited the chamber, his posture had changed. His breathing was shallower, his steps less certain. Jackson approached quietly. "You all right?" It was a necessary choice. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Kthar didn't reply, but he sat down nearby. The others didn't probe. They didn't judge. But they didn't ignore him either. They let him sit in the silence, surrounded, not alone. By the end of the week, something had shifted in the drills. Kthar wasn't first anymore. He wasn't last either. But now, when the team ran, he ran with them. When the instructors gave group orders, he responded without delay, without separate consideration. His answers shortened. His voice softened. The programming inside him didn't change, but his understanding of human behavior, of cohesion, grew. During an exercise designed to simulate off-world raids, the squad had to clear a bunker, neutralize hostiles, and extract a wounded ally, all under a ticking countdown. The instructors watched from behind mirror glass, recording every move. Inside the simulation, the humans moved by instinct. Stack at the door. Flash breach sweep. Kthar moved with them. Hulking frame tightened the corridor, his movements slower, controlled. When they found a wounded ally, represented by a 200-pound dummy, Kthar reached down. "I can carry it faster alone." Jackson grabbed the dummy's arm, but not smarter. They hoisted the weight together, the others covering their retreat. The mission was completed with 1 second to spare. When the debriefing ended, the sergeant stared directly at Kthar. "You're learning. Keep learning." He didn't praise. He never did. But the absence of criticism was enough. Later that night, in the dim barracks, Jackson pulled a photo from his footlocker. A woman and 2 children smiled up from it. He passed it to Kthar without explanation. "The aliens studied it for a long time. Your family, yeah, they are your purpose?" Jackson nodded. "They're why I keep going." Kthar removed something from his belt. A small, carved token, metal etched with alien glyphs. He placed it beside the photo. "My clutch brother. He was mine." They didn't speak further. They didn't need to. For the first time in his life, Kthar felt what it meant to fight not for glory, not for tradition, not for dominance, but for something bigger than himself. Something shared. Something human. Bootcamp wasn't over yet. More trials waited. But Kthar had already begun to understand the unspoken truth at the heart of the core. Strength didn't make a Marine. Endurance didn't make a warrior. What made them dangerous, what made them different, was that they never fought alone. They called it Hell Week. A 5-day crucible of nonstop drills, 0 sleep, live-fire exercises, and mental war games, all engineered to simulate the chaos of real combat. No safety nets. No timeouts. Everything they'd learned so far would be pushed past breaking. Kthar didn't fear it. Fear wasn't something he'd ever been taught to entertain. But as the days bled into each other and exhaustion gnawed at even his enhanced physiology, he began to feel something close to it. Not fear of pain, not fear of failure, but fear of letting his new squad down. Hour 39. Mud soaked their boots. The rain hadn't stopped in 17 hours. Recruits stumbled blindly through thick fog, lugging packs filled with stones, rifles slick with grime. Jackson was limping. Lou hadn't spoken in hours. The others shuffled like ghosts. But they didn't stop. Kthar had never known this kind of endurance. On Vok, strength was demonstrated in bursts, overwhelming force, immediate victory. But here, power was different. It wasn't in crushing opponents. It was in the refusal to quit, when quitting made sense, when bodies screamed for rest, when minds started to fracture. At hour 52, a surprise ambush drill scattered the unit. Smoke canisters, blank rounds, sirens. Chaos. Kthar saw 2 recruits pulled aside by simulated enemies and captured. The rest of the squad dove for cover behind a ridge. Hearts pounding, adrenaline failing. The instructors wanted panic. Disarray. But Jackson, voice hoarse and eyes bloodshot, barked orders like they were gospel. Flank left. Suppression fire. Kthar, breach and clear. No hesitation. Kthar moved, clearing brush and crashing to the smoke with terrifying speed. He reached the captives just as an instructor raised his marker weapon. One brutal movement. Disarm, push, lift. The 2 recruits were up and moving before they realized what happened. It wasn't the force that impressed them. It was the fact that Kthar didn't stop until everyone was safe. They regrouped in the rain, dripping, coughing, shivering, but alive. That night, they huddled in a dugout. No tents, no fires, just shared heat and ragged breathing. Lou leaned against Kthar's massive shoulder without asking. No one commented. No one needed to. By hour 67, recruits began hallucinating. One private swore he saw his dead dog barking orders. Another tried to dig a hole through concrete. The instructors watched, scribbled notes, but never intervened. It was part of the test. Kthar's mind, built for logic and clarity, began to glitch. Sounds echoed that weren't real. Colors bled into one another. Time lost all meaning. And in the middle of it, one question echoed louder than any command. Why? Why do they do this to themselves? Why endure this level of torment for a title? Jackson's voice cut to the fog again, just a whisper, barely audible. Because if this is hell, better we break here than on the battlefield. Kthar stared at him. The answer wasn't strategic. It wasn't efficient. But it made sense. They weren't building killers. They were forging brothers. On day 5, the final challenge came without warning. A forced march. 15 miles fully loaded under full sun. Any recruit who couldn't carry their pack was out. No exceptions. The squad moved like a single living thing. Shins splintered. Feet bled. But no one stopped. When Private Jensen collapsed at mile 8, it was Kthar who pulled his pack onto his own shoulder and helped him stand. When Lou fell at mile 11, Jackson stepped in. When Jackson faltered near mile 13, Kthar took his rifle without asking. By mile 15, they crossed together. The instructors were silent. Then one spoke. Not one dropout, he said, almost impressed. No cheers, just quiet nods. The moment was for them, not the sergeants. That night, for the first time, the recruits slept in real beds. Clean sheets. No drills. No barking orders. Just breathing in silence. Kthar lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, his body aching in ways he'd never experienced. But it wasn't just physical pain. It was something deeper, an ache he couldn't name. One built from memory, from effort, from sacrifice. He thought of the clutch brother he'd left behind on Vok. Would he have made it through this? Would he have understood what Kthar now understood? The final week began with live-fire coordination drills. Squads worked in units, clearing compounds, disabling threats, protecting hostages. The simulations weren't just tactical, they were moral puzzles. Scenarios where no perfect answer existed. In one drill, they found themselves pinned under sniper fire. The only cover was a civilian vehicle occupied by a simulated child. Kthar instinctively calculated options, but this time, he didn't act alone. Jackson laid down covering fire. Lou darted to the left. Kthar didn't hesitate. He moved to shield the vehicle, using his body to draw attention while the squad closed in on the sniper's position. They cleared the field in under 2 minutes. Afterward, the instructors reviewed the footage. You protected a non-combatant at the risk of failure. Why? Kthar answered calmly. Because that is the mission. The instructor narrowed his eyes. And what if it wasn't? Then the mission was wrong. There were no more questions. Graduation loomed. Rumors whispered that some aliens had tried this challenge before. None completed it. Kthar will be the first. But it didn't feel like a personal victory. Not anymore. On the final day, the recruits lined up in formation. Clean uniforms, boots polished, badges gleaming. One by one, names were called, certificates handed out, hands shaken. When Kthar's name echoed across the yard, the others didn't clap. They saluted. He returned the gesture. Perfect form, chest proud, gaze steady. Later, when the squad gathered for one final meal, Jackson raised his glass to the alien who came to prove he was better and ended up proving he belonged. Lou smirked. Still can't beat him at push-ups. I choose not to, Kthar replied. Laughter. Real human laughter. The kind he now understood. He had come to Earth to complete a challenge. He had completed far more. He had become one of them. Deployment orders came faster than expected. Within 48 hours of graduation, the new Marines were given real-world assignments. Kthar's unit, now designated Echo Platoon, was headed to the Eridanus Rift, a conflict zone tangled in border disputes and pirate warfare. The stakes weren't theoretical anymore. On board the dropship, silence hung over the cabin. No instructors. No simulations. This was the real thing. Rifles were live. Armor sealed. Orders came from command, not training staff. But something about the tension felt different. Not fear, not uncertainty. It was focus, sharp and absolute. Kthar sat strapped beside Jackson. No words were exchanged. They didn't need them anymore. Their objective: secure a forward outpost under siege. Civilians were trapped. The enemy, a coalition of mercenaries armed with high-grade alien tech, had cut power, communications, and supply lines. The last distress signal had been received 2 days ago. No response since. The moment the bay doors opened, Echo Platoon hit the ground like they'd been born there. Kthar moved at the front, eyes scanning, mind calculating every variable. The others flanked, rifles sweeping. They advanced as one. Inside the compound, bodies lay where they'd fallen. Civilians, medical staff, defenders. The place was a tomb, until the trap was sprung. Explosives erupted in a V pattern. Shrapnel shredded the air. Enemy troops poured in from the broken perimeter. Jackson shouted commands. Form on Kthar. Suppressive fire. Move! Without hesitation, Kthar surged forward, absorbing fire, returning blasts with lethal precision. He didn't think about cover. He was the cover. Marines moved behind him, confident in the armor that had held during Bootcamp and now proved itself in war. But this wasn't a clean fight. These enemies didn't follow rules. They used civilians as shields. They rigged the wounded with explosives. They jammed comms. They aimed not just to kill, but to break morale. At one point, pinned near a collapsed corridor, Jackson was hit. Not fatal, but enough to slow him. Kthar didn't hesitate. He grabbed him, pulled him behind a bulkhead, returned fire with terrifying speed. When Lou started to panic, blood streaming down his face, Kthar gripped his shoulder. Control your breath. You are still alive. That is all that matters. Lou steadied. By hour 3, they reclaimed the main command center. The remaining mercenaries fled into the lower tunnels. Echo Platoon followed. Every turn was a risk. Every footstep could trigger a mine. Kthar led from the front. Again, not because of ego, because that was what Marines did. In the final chamber, they found the last group of hostages, bound, injured, and scared. The enemy was desperate. They demanded extraction, a shuttle, freedom, threatened to kill everyone if denied. The squad stood frozen. One wrong move, and civilians would die. Kthar stepped forward. I will negotiate. No, Jackson warned. That's not our protocol. They expect human logic. Let them hear something else. Kthar approached alone, unarmed. The Merc leader screamed threats in 3 different languages. I am not human, Kthar said calmly, but I know what they value. Every one of those people is more important than you. The leader snarled. You think you scare me? No, I don't need to. But you should ask yourself, What does it take to earn the loyalty of them? He tilted his head back toward Echo Platoon, now lining up shots silently, methodically. They would follow me into hell, and we just came from it. The hesitation was enough. Jackson's signal was near invisible. Gunfire. One burst. Clean. Tactical. The hostages were safe. The enemy silenced. In the aftermath, as evac ships landed, Command issued a single sentence over encrypted comms. Mission complete. 0 civilian casualties. Echo Platoon didn't celebrate. They didn't need to. They'd done their job. And that was enough. Later, during debrief, high-ranking officers reviewed the footage. Analysts noted Kthar's performance, his tactical decisions, his restraint, his leadership. Someone asked the inevitable, should we consider integrating more of his kind? A general replied without pause, only if they're like him, only if they earn it. Weeks passed, then months. Echo Platoon saw combat again, and again, and again. In each mission, Kthar fought, not ahead, not behind, with them. He wasn't the strongest anymore. He wasn't the fastest. But he was the one they followed when it got dark, when plans failed, when the enemy had the upper hand. He spoke less now, listened more. And when he did speak, people listened. One night, in the quiet lull between deployments, Kthar found Jackson sitting alone outside the barracks, cleaning his sidearm. Still can't sleep? Kthar asked. Jackson smirked. Can't unsee things, either. Kthar sat beside him. In my people's tradition, he said, warriors are remembered by how they die. Jackson looked over. And what about how they live? Kthar considered that. They live through others. Jackson nodded. And there, under the alien stars of some forgotten world, 2 soldiers, one human, one not, sat in silence, bound not by blood, not by species, but by the unbreakable truth of shared pain, earned trust, and brotherhood forged in fire. At a ceremony months later, Kthar stood at attention as medals were handed out, not for valor, not for kills, but for acts of unity, sacrifice, humanity. When his name was called, he stepped forward, but he didn't salute the general. He turned toward Echo Platoon and saluted them, for they were the reason he had endured. They were the ones who made him more than a soldier. They had made him human, in the ways that mattered most. And in that, Kthar had achieved something no alien had ever done. He hadn't just completed Marine Bootcamp. He'd become a Marine.